This is Alice. She's going to recite the poem from Singing Rawhide. It's called They Played Poker in Them Days. Alice knows a lot of different poems, but we're going to do this one. She's just amazing. Okay, here we go. Two poker friends was playing.
Two poker friends was playing in the Prairie Dog Saloon. A battered piano, bumping, swaying under a homespun tune.
And out in the street,
a dog was baying, mournful at the moon. Lazy One-Eye pushed his chips across the tabletop. Texas fingered his two-gun grips, prepared to get the drop. They
kept on
playing with tight shut lips as if they'd never stop. Wendell polished up the bar, shining the glasses too. And in the mirror, you saw the scar where a bullet once went through. On his cheek like a faded star, the wound looked sort of blue.
Then sudden like the door swung in.
The barkeep, since deceased, saw standing there with a foolish grin a fresh kid from the east. His brains was just a hunk of fat. His chaps was twice his size. High heels and spurs and a drooping hat pulled down over staring eyes. Tex took 3 cards. One-Eye stood pat and looking old and wise.
The kid waltzed in a couple paces.
The kid waltzed in a couple of paces with a kind of lingering look.
No.
As they'd come to the open spaces.
The kid waltzed in a couple of paces, pulled out his pocketbook, then stared at both the gamblers' faces.
With a kind of lingering look as if he'd come to the open spaces thinking each guy a crook.
Give me a chance.
Give me a chance at your game of cards. I'm hooping up for fair. I came out here where there ain't no yards and there's plenty of healthy air. Here's $1,000 to start with cards, and I always gamble square.
One-Eye had gathered up a pile of the different colored chips. They'd been a-playing quite a while, and drunk their hooch and sips. Tex watched his cards
without a smile, and One-Eye wiped his lips.
Red chips.
What?
Red chips was highest.
Oh yeah, red chips was highest. One-Eye had some, and plenty of blue and white. Hey Wendell, give us a shock of rum. We're playing here all night. Texas here is sort of dumb, but he loves a poker fight.
Each drank his poison.
Each drank his poison with a frown. Tex gave the deck a twist, shuffled the cards and laid them down with a bang of his heavy fist. They hardly even glanced around. The kid, he didn't exist. Ain't you ever seen so much real dough? The kiddy thought he was funny. Texas turns around quite slow, remarking, "Now look here, sonny. If you got 1,000 and want a show, here's a white chip for your money." The kiddy looked at the chip a while, his face growing white. I guess that game it weren't his style, 'cause he faded out of sight. And Tex remarked without a smile, "We're playing here all night."
Wonderful.
That is amazing.
Wow,
102 years old, and you can remember that. Wow.
2020.
A lavender cowboy. The hairs on his chest were 2, but he wished to follow the heroes who fight as the he-men do. Yet he was inwardly troubled by a dream that gave no rest. When he read of the heroes in action, he wanted more hair on his chest. Herpicide, many hair tonics were rubbed in morning and night, yet when he looked in the mirror, no new hair grew in sight. He battled for Red Nell's honor and cleaned out a hold-up nest and died with his 6 guns smoking, but only 2 hairs on his chest. Woman, said old Virgilius, the Roman, to his Filius, is frail. But he was supercilious and male. Woman is precarious, angelic, false, nefarious, and true, said Shakespeare. In fact, said Shakespeare, various. He knew. Woman is undeniable, is changeable and pliable, and can be just as unreliable as man. A raven sat upon a tree, and not a word he spoke, for his beak contained a piece of brie, or maybe it was Roquefort. Well, make it any kind you please. At all events, it was a cheese. Beneath the tree's umbrageous limb, a hungry fox sat smiling. He saw the raven watching him and spoke in words beguiling. "J'admire," said he, "ton beau plumage," the which was simply persiflage. 2 things there are, no doubt you know, to which a fox is used. A rooster that is bound to crow, a crow that's bound to roost, and whichsoever he espies, he tells the most unblushing lies. "Sweet bird," he said, "I understand you're more than merely natty. I hear you sing to beat the band, an Adelina Patti. Pray render with your liquid tongue a bit from Gotterdammerung." This subtle speech was aimed to please the crow, and it succeeded. He thought no bird in all the trees could sing as well as he did. In flattery completely doused, he gave the jewel song from Faust. But gravitation's law, of course, as Isaac Newton showed it, exerted on the cheese its force, and elsewhere soon bestowed it. In fact, there is no need to tell what happened when to earth it fell. I grieve to add that when the bird took in the situation, he said one brief, emphatic word, unfit for publication. The fox was greatly startled, but he only sighed and answered, "Tut." The moral is, a fox is bound to be a shameless sinner. And also, when the cheese comes around, you know it's after dinner. But this is only known to a few. The fox is after dinner, too. The king asked the queen, and the queen asked the dairymaid, "Could we have some butter for the royal slice of bread?" The dairymaid said, "Certainly, I'll go and tell the cow now before she goes to bed." The older niece said sleepily, "You'd better tell His Majesty that marmalade is tasty if it's very thickly spread." The dairymaid said, "Oh," and went to Her Majesty. "Speaking of the butter for the royal slice of bread, Many people think that marmalade is nicer. Would you like to try a little marmalade instead? The Queen said, "Oh," and went to His Majesty. The King said, "Oh," and then he said, "Oh, dearie me." The King sobbed, "Oh, dearie me," and went back to bed. The Queen said, "Oh," and went to the dairymaid. The dairymaid said, "Oh," and went to the shed. The Alderney said, "Oh, I didn't really mean it. Here's milk for his porringer and butter for his bread." The dairymaid took the butter and gave it to Her Majesty. The King said, "Butter, eh?" and jumped out of bed. "Nobody," he said, as he kissed her tenderly. "Nobody," he said, as he slid down the banisters. "Nobody," he said, "could call me a fussy man, but I do like a little bit of butter to my bread." Orson Weatherby George Dupree took great care of his mother, though he was only 3. James said to his mother, "Mother," he said he, "you must never go down to the end of the town if you don't go down with me." James Morrison's mother put on her golden gown. James Morrison's mother drove to the end of the town. James Morrison's mother said to herself, said she, "I can get right down to the end of the town and be back in time for tea." King John put up a notice, "Lost or stolen or strayed. James Morrison's mother seems to have been mislaid. Last seen wandering vaguely, quite of her own accord. She tried to get down to the end of the town, 40 shillings reward." James Morrison's mother hasn't been heard of since. King John said he was sorry. So did the Queen and Prince. King John, somebody told me, said to a man he knew, "Well, if people go down to the end of the town, well, what can anyone do?" James Morrison, commonly known as Jim, told his other relations not to go blaming him. James said to his mother, "Mother," he said he, "you must never go down to the end of the town without consulting me." James Morrison, Weatherby George Dupree, took great care of his mother, though he was only 3. James said to his mother, "Mother," said he, "you must never go down to the end of the town if you don't go down with me." A Brahmin, fat and debonair, denied the potency of prayer. "Absurd," he scoffed, "to say that gods at ease on high would stoop to clods and heed our million warring prayers to regulate our small affairs. This dogomist of early days was lost within a jungle's maze, where wildly circling wide about to find a pathway leading out upon a forest godling shrine he chants, o'erhung with leaf and vine, and wonder, horror, crouching there a mighty tiger, bowed in prayer, tail curled as may be well supposed, paws folded, eyes devoutly closed. Strong God, he heard the tiger say, I pray thee, send to me a prey. The trusting tiger closed his prayer. Behold, a Brahmin trembling there. The Brahmin never scoffed a whit. The prayer had answer. He was it. The moving finger writes, and having writ, moves on. Nor all your piety nor wit may call it back to alter half a line, nor all your tears wash out one word of it. The moving finger writes, and having writ, moves on. Nor all your piety nor wit may call it back to alter half a line, nor all your tears wash out one word of it. The moving finger writes, and having writ, moves on. Nor all your piety nor wit may call it back to alter half a line, nor all your tears wash out one word of it.